We're going to start in about 3 minutes. So if you need a donut, get your donut. We will start shortly. Thanks. Right. Hello. Good evening. Welcome to Donut.js. Yay, donuts. Hey, My name is Christy. I use she, her pronouns, and I will be your host this evening. Thank you. Thank you. Thank y'all for coming. It's really cool to see all these people here. Yeah, thanks for coming out to support our speakers and each other. Thanks to all of the organizers, all the volunteers. It takes a lot of people to make this happen, and definitely appreciate all the help. See, if you see someone with a yellow lanyard, they are an organizer or a volunteer. So if you have questions or need help or are bored and want someone to talk to, they are here for you. And we want to thank Mirabai Knight of Steno Night. She's doing our live captions, and she is awesome. Love those emojis. So you can go to donut.js.club/captions if you'd rather follow along on your own screen. Otherwise, they're printed on the screen over here. And yeah, if you have trouble reading the captions, please find someone with the yellow lanyard, let them know. Also, I'm going to talk for just a second about our code of conduct. This exists to try and make this environment as inclusive, expansive, friendly, welcoming, and safe as possible. Right? Assuming good intent and asking everyone to just be cool sounds nice, but it's not really enough. So it's important that we codify the behavior that we expect and give you ways to report any problems that you see or experience. Ellie Cheng will be handling any code of conduct reports tonight, and she is here somewhere there, waving at us. So if anyone makes you feel unsafe, uncomfortable, unwelcome, please talk to her, send an email, call the reporting number. They're all on the slide here. We want this to be just a really great place for everyone. And take a minute to talk about our beneficiary. So in the past, we have sponsored a different nonprofit every month. We're trying something a little bit different this year, and having a new beneficiary 4 times a year, so once a quarter. And so this allows us to raise more money for the nonprofit and to build some, actual relationships between them and you fine folks. So our nonprofit for this quarter is Pueblo Unido. And we have someones here to tell us more about what they are, what they do. Cam, yes? You want to come up and tell us a little bit about yourself? Oh, thanks.
Thanks, Christy and Matt, for having us. I was here last month. We really appreciate you all making us your beneficiary for the first quarter. I'm the executive director of Pueblo Unido, and our board member Nina is here as well. She's a little bit under the weather, so I'm going to give the pitch tonight. We started off, Pueblo Unido started off as a grassroots, just a community group in 2017. With a friend of mine, Francisco Rodriguez, thank you. He's one of the first DACA recipients in Oregon to be detained under the Trump administration. There was a big protest for Francisco's release that I was a part of, and after he was released, within just a few hours of a demonstration, we decided to start a community group to help other folks in the community who were impacted by detention and deportation. Since then, we've become a nonprofit 501c3 and worked with several folks. I think 30 clients we've been able to connect to free consultation or legal representation, which is the most predictive factor in whether somebody will actually win their case against deportation and be able to remain in this country with their family. And 6 of our clients to date have been released from detention because we were able to pay bonds and pay for attorneys because of events like this and because of support from other businesses and individuals in the community. So I just wanted to say thank y'all so much for having us here. It means a lot, and it really does a lot for the community. And if you guys would like to get involved, please feel free to reach out. We have a website that's launched here. You see the link. If you want to go on and shoot us some comments on how we could maybe improve it, that'd be great. Our volunteer who leads the tech team would be happy to answer any questions. We are looking at, I think in his words, considering migrating the site over to WordPress, whatever that means. And we're interested in selling merchandise and tickets for our anniversary event through the platform. That's something that our current tech team doesn't have a lot of experience around and would love some support. And we've got a few other projects as well. Anyway, we'd love support in any way that you guys would like to show it. So thanks for coming tonight and for having us. Appreciate it.
Cool, thank you. And thanks to all of you for helping support Pueblo Unido by coming and buying a ticket tonight. Please do talk to them or visit their website to learn more and get involved. All right, so tonight we will have 3 lightning talks, 10 to 12 minutes long, with a 10-minute break between each one. Our first talk is Ron Bronson, who will be talking to us about dark patterns. Ron Bronson is new to PDX. Since coming to town, he's been involved with Code for PDX, Creative Mornings Portland, and leading the interaction design group within PDX HCD. That's a lot of letters. Ron has worked in public sector tech for 15 years and speaks at design and tech conferences all over the world. So please give a warm donutty welcome to Ron.
Bring your personal machine instead. I've never actually had to do this in a crowd before. All right, here we go. Because normally I don't bring this machine with me to things like this, but I was working and then I came here. Anyway, how's it going? How are you? Ron Bronson. Today, I know you're thinking, some of you are like, oh my God, Harry Potter. Like, I don't know anything about Harry Potter. Like, spoiler alert, this is all I knew. But I thought, how clever, right? You know, I've seen all the movies, but yeah, like Star Trek, I got you, but but Harry Potter, I can't help you. Anyway, that being said, let's talk a little bit about dark patterns. So, can I? Oh, okay. Whatever. Great. I'm not going to tell you where I work, but you can Google it. You probably figured it out pretty quickly, but you can Google that if you want. Whatever. I've been doing this stuff a while. So really this whole talk, sort of the genesis of this talk, was me thinking about, think about driving down the road, going 60 miles an hour, texting somebody, which none of you have ever done before, but like, and I thought about that once, and I'm thinking, why is that even a possibility? Like, why didn't we think that maybe that's not a great idea to let folks be able to do that? And you're thinking, yeah, that's like a user problem, right? Well, that's what made me think about this topic. So for the last couple of years, I've been doing talks sort of all around not just dark patterns, but thinking about ethics and thinking about like the ways we build things and how we abdicate responsibility for what we build to other people, whether it's to users, whether it's to our bosses, whether it's to the companies we work for, whether it's to our cats, I don't know. And so a little bit for the folks who are not quite sure what a dark pattern is. It's a user interface crafted to deceive a user into doing something that they might not otherwise do. Those stupid things where you try to click something and it puts an X somewhere else because you can't click out of the ad, that's a dark pattern. All of you right now just thinking all dark patterns you see all the time. And there are a variety of them that exist. And what I love to tell people all the time is that dark patterns don't just exist online. One of my main frustrations, don't follow me on Twitter, it's a disaster, but if you ever did somehow ever just like stumble upon me on Twitter because it was late one night and you were bored, you might hear me complaining about mass transit, not in Portland so much because I don't use it, but in other cities when you travel, because what often happens is you see the kiosks that have really shitty UIs. I said I wasn't going to swear. Fail. That's a dark pattern. Like, who writes this text? Who designed this UI? If you've been to the supermarket self-checkout lane lately, same thing. Like, they don't test these things. These are problems. Trick questions, really bad content. I know that nobody wants to spend money on content. Really important thing. These are all issues. And they're all important to the things you're building. And for the folks who are like in school and you're thinking about things, these are really important things to be considering. Norman Potter, Google him. Lots of good things. Lots of good things. And the beauty of this stuff is a lot of the quotes and a lot of the things you're going to find, this stuff's not new. These topics aren't new. These conversations are not new. They may feel new because we're just experiencing them, but a lot of these conversations around human-computer interaction have been happening for 50 years. We just ignore what they were saying. La, 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 making money. Some other language we can use just to sort of make sure we're on the same page. About an affordance. A good way to describe an affordance is when you walk into a door and it says push on it. That's an affordance because you might think you need to pull the door. And friction doesn't always have to be bad. So design friction. Think of all the different ways that designing for friction could be good. Like making sure that someone can't get into my computer because I shouldn't be using it here. Or like your banking account, right? All the friction you create on a phone so that somebody can't just take your phone and immediately get to your, might be easier if you could just get to your phone and immediately check your bank account and how much money you have because all of you are swimming in cash, right? But like having friction to prevent that might make that a little bit better. So again, as examples of dark patterns, most of you should know what a dark pattern is. If you do not, go on the internet and type dark pattern, and then a dark pattern will show up to block you from seeing what a dark pattern is. But they exist in every kinds of things, from applications, from trusted companies to companies that are a bit more nefarious. They're deliberately intended to create stress so that you do something you didn't mean to do, usually involving money. That, again, we've already discussed that you clearly have a lot of. And as I said, design frictions can be helpful, and they're not necessarily meant to be deceptive. That being said, friction can be a real pain too. And so you have to be mindful of the friction that we're creating. So one of the things that happened in the past year of me sort of researching this talk and working, and this is a much longer talk. I had to condense an hour and a half talk into 10 minutes, and it's going to go great. But for the record, so why is it going so fast? Shh. But one of the things I stumbled into is the field of integrity engineering, which apparently is like a thing for oil field engineering, like for like derricks out in the ocean, because it turns out, as you're all well aware, these things spill. So they have a whole bunch of folks whose only job is to mitigate all of the different things that might happen to ensure this doesn't happen. Spoiler, it still happens. But they created a job around it. It's a whole discipline around it. And it's not necessarily like super well known, but if you Google it, it shows up. And they hire folks to do this. And I'm thinking, seems familiar. Can't imagine why you might need somebody whose only job it is to think about these kinds of things. My favorite example to bring up, and it's not because I'm black, but it's also a thing, is when Pokemon Go launched, it didn't work in certain black neighborhoods. And you're like, well, why? It's because the goofballs who made it didn't go down the street. That's why. But before you get all high and mighty and go, how stupid they were, we're building things every single day and we don't go down the street. We do this all of the time, and it's not just about one group or another group. It's just about the things that we're doing. And so we have to ask ourselves questions about the things that we're building. Some fun tweets about, and one of the things I want to say about this topic too is that much of the conversation around designing for better design is about ethics, and it's not about ethics. I mean, it is an ethical conversation. But by talking about ethics, we abdicate the responsibility that all of us have, whether we're front-end designers or developers, engineers, UX folks, content people, IAs, whatever you're doing. What do you do when you realize that you're addressing the wrong problem? And in most cases, we're not empowered to fix that, like at a core level. Like, I recognize that. You're just a cog in a wheel. And if you saw where I started on the beginning of this whole thing, you understand that I understand all about being a cog in a wheel. But you still can ask questions. You can still push the envelope. You can still do things within your everyday practice to ensure that, if nothing else, you create friction to ensure that we do less dumb things or less harmful things or less bad things. So again, what can you do about this? Well, other than cry. One of the things you can do, very actionable things you can do, one is play the designated dissenter. So you're on a team, you're trying to solve a particular thing, or you're really early in it, like before you even build anything out, you're just wireframing. Somebody needs to be on that team designated to be like, but why did we put that there? Why is that menu here? Why are we putting all icons here? Do we assume that folks are going to know what this means? Well, yeah, we know because, did we test it? Well, no, but did we? No. Ask better questions. The second thing we can do is once we've gone past that, okay, you got to the company late. These things are already done. What about auditing UIs and products for dark patterns? Hey, Bill, I noticed we have a dark pattern. What? Let me show you. Hey, a lot of times you'll find, though, that we didn't realize that. It's a bug. Flag that. Ticket that. Put that somewhere else. Put an issue on GitHub or whatever else. One of the things I have not designed yet, again, this is a much longer talk, and I'm not giving it again until like June, so preview, is exclusive. You're like, well, yeah, I saw that. Ron Bronson, yeah, old news, been there. One of the things I'm working on, though, is this thing called like a 341, and you're like, why am I calling it that? I'll tell you when we're done. But it is like a script where you can just like designate what hey, I found a dark pattern, here's where it is, here's where I found it, and so forth. And that way you can just log these things, even if you don't have an internal form for figuring these kinds of things out. And you can do it online too. But I really like putting it on paper because I feel like people hate paper, and if you have enough of it, maybe they just think about it. And the last one is, and I'm going to say this that's why I bolded it. I didn't. That was a mistake. Is do your own research. Oftentimes we like to look at other folks' research. Well, some other company did it, and we're small, so if they did it, it must work. No, is that your audience? Are they your folks? Are they the folks you're targeting? It's important to make sure that users are seeing things early and often. And if you only have a InVision prototype, show them that. If you've got something more, higher fidelity, show them that too. But people need to be seeing these things as early as possible so that you can find these things before it's too late. Advocating for slower design doesn't make you lazy. It's just you need to be thinking about what you're going to let loose. Because once it's out there, folks are going to drive down the road 75 miles an hour to text their friend about a cool thing they saw on Instagram. And I have a reading list. It's much longer than this, but 5 books that you can take a picture of the slide or ask me later, and I will send you way more books than you want. Future Ethics by Senate Bowles that came out last year. Really good. Talks all about this stuff and does a lot of calling back to old topics about this. Again, it's not new. Adversarial Design. The Best Interface is No Interface by Golden Krishna, which is one of my favorite books. Design for Real Life by Sarah Wachter-Becher, and Dark Matter and Trojan Horses, which isn't really as much a book as much as it was a talk that he put into a book that's got some really good vocabulary. And I think the thing, too, is that, and I didn't put a slide for this, but so much of this is about nomenclature and being able to understand that we're all speaking from the same language, that we understand the same terms. And we can't always presume that everybody in our organization, we always want to presume the best intentions, but folks don't always know what we're talking about. So it's helpful to, A, normalize the language you're talking about. 2, making sure that you say, oh, this book, I was looking at this thing, sending those articles, bringing those books in, sharing that knowledge. Not everyone's going to be receptive, but again, assuming the best, folks are often just want to know things that we're learning so that they can level up too. Speaking of Golden Krishna. We all want to do good things, whether we're building, big things, small things, little things. We all want to do good work, but in order to do that, we've got to be mindful of the pitfalls of the work that we're doing. That's it. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Ron. Give it up one more time. That's great. Cool. So we are now going to take a 10-minute break. Have a donut. Have a LaCroix. Meet your neighbors. We'll be back here in 10 minutes. So enjoy. Yeah, I'm also standing really close to the mic, Mirabai. Is this better? Oh, okay. Mirabai wants us to turn the game down.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so can you just let people know that we've changed the number for the code of conduct recording, and I just changed it on the slide, so updating the website. Yes, yeah, and then you can speaker, and then I'm changing the number on the website too. Thank you. Yeah, whenever you're ready.
And we're back. Hello. Just one quick note before we go further. Wanted to give y'all a heads up that the code of conduct phone number is different than what we showed you right at the beginning. This is now correct. So so use that if you need to use that. I'm sorry? Not actually talking to me. Okay, cool. Okay, so good with that? Cool. Couple of announcements before we move on. We are very grateful to our friends at XOXO for sponsoring our Code of Conduct and Code of Conduct Responder this month. XOXO is an annual festival celebrating independent artists and creators working online, and it is very cool if you haven't been. They will be back at Revolution Hall this year, September 5th through 8th, and they'll be releasing details in early April. XOXO is also hiring a project manager and an experienced developer, and I believe they added a third position just today. It's a front-end position. So for a new platform that they are building to help artists share their work, build community, and support their creative practice with ongoing financial support. They're looking to build a team that better represents their diverse community of artists, so they are specifically looking for candidates beyond cisgender white men. If this sounds interesting or you would like to know more, Andy McMillan and Andy Bayo are here tonight. I want to wave. So find them and talk to them about it. And thanks again for sponsoring us. Yeah. Clap for that. We would also like to thank Stumptown Syndicate. They are our fiscal sponsor, and they also provide guidance and support. Stumptown Syndicate's mission is to create and support communities and programs here that are inclusive and empowering. So over the years, they've worked on programs like Open Source Bridge, Caligator, Safety First PDX, and of course, Donut.js. So it's a new year, and Stumptown Syndicate has 2 brand new board members. So we're excited to see what they'll be up to in 2019. And thank you, Stumptown. Yeah. All right, next up is Zach Davis, who will talk to us about building an open source publishing platform for universities. Zach Davis is the co-founder of Cast Iron Coding, a web development agency here in Portland. For the last 15 years, he's been working as a developer, mostly in JavaScript and Ruby. Before returning to Oregon in 2004, he taught English literature in New York and pursued his interests in instructional technology and the digital humanities. So please give a warm donut-y welcome for Zach Davis.
Thank you.
Have the ones with the fingerprint. Can you hear me okay? Great. I'm getting over a cold, so I apologize for any hacking that I might do during this cough. Okay, so knowledge should be mostly free. I'm going to talk a little bit today about a piece of open source software I've been working on for the last 3.5, 4 years called Manifold Scholarship. It's an open source web platform for scholarly publishing. But before we talk about that, we're going to take a little detour into academic publishing generally. And academic publishing goes way back, arguably to 1665, when the first issue of the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society was published. This journal is still in print today. Here's a more recent issue from April 19th, 2018. I think it's a little bit kind of awe-inspiring to think about how much knowledge and research has come out of this one journal for the last 300 years, let alone the whole body of thousands of journals that have come out of the university press system. In 1978, I'm going from memory because I can't see my notes on this, Jimmy Carter declared University Press Week in America to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Johns Hopkins University Press, our first academic press. We need university presses. We need them for a number of reasons. They disseminate scholarship. Without university presses, knowledge gets trapped in academia, and it doesn't get spread out to the culture and society at large. We need university presses because they publish scholarship for which there may not be a large market. I like the idea of a world in which we can have research that isn't commercially viable, that isn't going to be sold in the near future. University presses test for truth, and they ensure quality of scholarship by enforcing a peer review process and robust editorial controls. They're often small, local, and regional, and they work towards preserving and amplifying distinct cultures and voices. And finally, they partner with libraries to preserve scholarship. They're deeply invested in the kind of big job of preserving generations of knowledge. But these are difficult times for our university presses in America. There's increasing public skepticism of academic expertise generally. I'm told that we're entering a new war, a war on science, which is more stupefying than just about anything I can imagine. There are concerns about the reliability of the peer review system. There was a hoax recently where 3 scholars wrote 20 fake papers and submitted them mostly to gender studies and cultural studies journals. And of those 20, only 6 failed to be published, or 7 were published and the rest were in the peer review system when this was publicized. And this is being seized upon by the right as evidence of the fact that all academics are biased cultural warriors. I'm not sure that that's the right takeaway from what happened here. A better takeaway might be that the peer review system, while imperfect, was not really set up to account for falsified data and fundamentally bad actors and dishonest people. We have giant corporate publishers with racketeering-like business practices. Quote, this is from a Huffington Post article, academic publisher Elsevier, which owns a majority of the prestigious academic journals, has higher operating profits than Apple. In 2013, they posted 39% profits. This is an old industry, and we have this giant publishing company raking in money. We have declining education funding. We haven't made hard choices about how we want to fund scholarship as a society. The model kind of works like this right now. You have the university, which makes the scholarship. They hand it off to this corporate publisher who didn't really pay for that scholarship to be produced. That was funded probably by tuition and tax dollars and whatnot. And then they sell that back to the university at a tremendously high markup, millions of dollars for libraries to subscribe to this knowledge, to the knowledge that they produced. That's how you get to 39% markup. We have a serious problem with labor in academia, and there's a whole nother talk that's going to take more than 10 minutes to do that one. Quote, in contrast to the exorbitant prices for access, the majority of academic journals are produced, reviewed, and edited on a voluntary basis by academics who take part in the tasks for tenure and promotion. So what do? Well, we might just burn it all down, right, and start over. That's one answer. We have things like Sci-Hub now, right, which are essentially taking articles from these journal databases and making them freely available. It's like the Napster of scientific knowledge. I'm not sure that's a sustainable way forward for public knowledge, but it's something. I think we might want to look at, instead of burning it down, revising things a little bit, moving towards a system where the incentives are aligned properly and where knowledge can be returned to the public. One of the ways we get there is through open access. This isn't a silver bullet, but it's one solution that gets us down the road. And with open access, the model is a little bit different. The university still produces the scholarship, but now they take money to the publisher and pay the publisher to publish it. That knowledge is then returned back to the public and the university in the form of open access materials. Europe kind of gets it, right? After January 1st, scientific publications that are coming from research that was funded by public grants must be published in compliant open access journals. This is called Plan S. New York gets it, or is getting it. They recently doubled down on an investment of taxpayer money in open educational resources, which are not the same as open access, but related. And the Mellon Foundation, who funded the work we did on Manifold Scholarship, and I will return to that now, gets it as well. We were funded by the Scholarly Communications Department at Mellon. They gave us a 3-year grant for about $750,000, and then a 2-year grant for about $800,000. My company, Cast Iron Coding, has been building Manifold in collaboration with the City University of New York, which is the largest urban university system in America, and the University of Minnesota Press, which is a well-known publisher of cultural and critical theory, among other things. The Mellon Foundation has thrown money at us, and they've thrown money at a number of other organizations, millions of dollars, to try to address this problem, some of these problems in publishing. And they have a number of different goals that they're trying to solve, many of which are around bringing new technologies and digital platforms to publishing, which is kind of an old-fashioned and stodgy business. With Manifold, our goals were fairly straightforward. We wanted to build something that fit into existing workflows. We wanted to build something where authors could enrich text with media and new kinds of resources that didn't make it into the print edition. We wanted readers to have a platform that wasn't crappy and where they might actually enjoy reading a book on it. So we spent money on design, on UX design. And we wanted readers to be able to annotate and talk to each other. So I'm going to kind of quickly run through some screenshots here. This is the homepage of Manifold on the University of Minnesota Press's instance. Manifold is 2 parts. The back end is an API-only Rails application, and the front end is an isomorphic React application. When you drill down into a project, you get to the book. This is a book called The Perversity of Things on Hugo Gernsback, famed inventor. And the reader looks like this. Here you see the author at work in his private study, aided by the isolator, which affords total concentration and air supply through that little tube on the front. A wonderful book, Metagaming, is on Manifold, where you can see a game, or you can download a game that the authors made called 99 Exercises in Play, where Mario finds himself stretched, squashed, duplicated, displaced, slowed down, sped up, zoomed in, or zoomed out. And there's wonderful things like this involved in that. There's books on Python, how to code Python, that are up on Manifold. This was written by somebody at DigitalOcean. The University of New York is using it as an OER platform, and authors are using it for peer review of their books in a pre-publication state. Manifold has a nice back end. Anyone can kind of go in. You don't have to be a genius to use it. Press users can get in here. They can ingest text from EPUBs, Google Docs, Markdown, HTML, Word docs, combinations of these sources. It's on GitHub. It's open source. You can look at the code. You can contribute to it. You can download it yourself. You can read the tutorial on DigitalOcean and set up your own droplet, spin it up, and have your own instance of Manifold. And once you do, you can finally start that online poetry journal you've been dreaming about. You can finish that novel and publish it. And more importantly, when you do that, you will control the platform. You will own your intellectual property. So consider looking at Manifold and contributing, if you're so inclined, to what I think is a really great open source project. And I've left some Manifold goodies up here. If anybody would like some, please help yourself after my talk. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Zach. So it is now time for another 10-minute break. Feel free to move around or stay seated, grab some food. If you have suggestions for us, the feedback box is over there. Otherwise, we'll see you in 10. This is your 2-minute warning. Be coming back shortly. Yes, you are. Hello, welcome back. Y'all want to come back? Come back to me. Hey, come on back. All right. We good? Yeah. Come on back, friends. All right, welcome back. Just another quick thing or two before our last talk. We want to thank Alchemy Code Lab for hosting us tonight. If you don't know, that is the place you are in right now, so thank you. Yeah. They are providing this space for us at no cost, which is super cool of them. It lets us keep this event low cost and to donate even more to our beneficiary. Do we have Alchemy here to talk about? Cool. Yes. Okay. They will come up and tell us a little bit more about what they do.
I'll be brief. Okay, hi, I'm Paige. I'm currently in career track at Alchemy. We are learning, hi Kate, we are learning React with Redux currently. We just had our first day of Redux. So if you want to talk to me about that, I'm all ears. But if you have any questions about Alchemy or what we do, just let me know. There's a bunch of Alchemy folks in the room, so if you want to talk to any of us about what we do, we have a lot of fun. So yeah, career track ends in a couple weeks, so we're getting pumped. But thanks for being here. Woo.
right, thank you, Alchemy. So, our final speaker of tonight is Vaidehi Joshi, who will be talking to us about the JavaScript object model. Vaidehi is an engineer at Tilde in Portland, Oregon, where she works on Skylight. She enjoys building and breaking code, but loves creating empathetic engineering teams a whole lot more. She's the creator of Base CS, a weekly writing series that explored the fundamentals of computer science, and is co-host of the Base CS podcast and a producer of the Base CS video series. She's currently at work on a new series on the basics of distributed systems called Base DS. So, please give a warm donut-y welcome to Vaidehi.
All right. Oh. Let's try this. How's that? Good? Great? Fantastic? Thank you for such a warm welcome, everyone. Thank you. That's so nice. This is a new talk for me, so those are always the more nerve-wracking ones. I spoke at a Donut.js like 2 years ago, and it was a wonderful experience, so I feel very safe bringing a new talk here, so hopefully it'll go okay. But yes, hello, my name is Vaidehi, and I am an engineer at a company here in Portland called Tilde, and we work on a product called Skylight, which is your favorite Rails and Ruby profiler. Side note, we are actually hiring, so come talk to me after that. I'm not going to say anything else about that the rest of the talk, but I will be here. You can talk to me. We are hiring. But what I do want to talk to you about today is what we talk about when we talk about the JavaScript object model. I want to talk to you about these curly braces. I want to talk to you about JavaScript objects. If you've used JavaScript, if you've played with it, if you've seen it, you've probably seen an object, used an object, probably interacted with it when you didn't even know you were interacting with it. They are everywhere. They're the cornerstone of the JavaScript language. And when we think about objects, we probably think about something that looks like this. This is an empty object. It's a very sad, empty cat. We're just calling it cat. It's going to be around for the rest of this talk, so get comfortable. But this is like probably what you imagine when you think about a JavaScript object. They're pretty ubiquitous. You see them a lot. But how many of us actually know how it works? You don't have to raise your hands, but I'll raise my hand. Until I learned about the JavaScript object model, I didn't know a lot about how objects really worked. But today that's going to change. I learned about how the JavaScript object model works under the hood, and I thought it was so fascinating. So hopefully today, by the end of this, you will find it at least somewhat fascinating too. If not, this cat will be around, and you can just imagine a cute cat every single time you see it. So JavaScript objects can be created with or without properties. For example, here is a cat object, and we've created a sound property, and it's equal to a string called meow. We can have properties on them or not, but usually when we think about objects, we think about properties being attached to them. We can kind of think about properties being variables that are attached to objects. And when we access or interface with any kind of JavaScript object, we're usually doing it with two types of notations, either dot notation or bracket notation. And that's how you access the property, because usually you have properties so you can do something with them down the road. But there are actually other ways of interfacing with properties on an object. I am talking about property descriptors. By the way, I found some interesting animations when I was doing this talk, so there are going to be some stuff to look out for. So JavaScript objects come built in with property descriptors. And property descriptors are actually objects within themselves, which just like blows your mind. And what they are, they basically describe the nature of a property on an object. We can think of property descriptors as the metadata, the internal metadata on an object. So we can kind of get a full picture of what an object actually looks like by looking at an object's property descriptors. So how do you look at a property descriptor on an object? Well, you can use some methods off the object constructor API or the reflect API. You should probably use the reflect API for reasons I can't get into today. But do as I say, not as I do, because everything's going to be object constructor because it's easier to write. So you have a property on an object. How do you see its descriptor? Well, we can use a method on the object constructor called getOwnPropertyDescriptor. And in this case, we have a sound property. Let's see what that descriptor metadata thing looks like. Well, it looks like this. This is the object property, sorry, this is the property descriptor on our object. I might do that again. There's a lot of words that all sound the same. And we can call object.getOwnProperty to see the metadata of that property. So, wait, I thought objects and properties are just key value pairs. No, they actually have this little object inside of them that they carry around in this little like suitcase, and they peek their head out and they're like, hi, I'm a descriptor. That's what they look like. And then you see them and you're like, oh, scream cat. So when you look at an object's property, for example, sound, you can see that its descriptor has 4 keys on it. In this case, we see it has value, writable, enumerable, and configurable. We're going to start by just looking at 2. Let's look at value and writable. The value and writable keys actually tell us a lot about the sound property. The fact that they exist tell us that this is a data property. So what is a data property? A data property is one that has some value which may or may not be writable, which means you can edit it, you can change it. And in our case, we had a sound property, and it has a value, which is a string, and we can change it because it's writable. Makes sense so far, hopefully. The interesting thing is that a data property can be equal to a lot of things. So it could be a string, it could be a number, it could be another object. It could also be a function. So here's another property on our cat. Our cat's getting a little like sassier now. It's like it has this say hi property, and it's like very cheerful. It's like hi. But this is just a data property. Of course, because a data property right now we're assuming it's writable. That means you can write to it and you can reassign it. So our cat could get kind of sassy. You could use the property accessor and just reassign what the value of that function is, which may or may not be good. Depends on how you like your cats. But in either case, because all of these are data properties, we know that there's going to be some value for it, whether it's a string or a number or function. Anything that you can assign onto an object could be the value of the data property. And we know we can rewrite it. So in this case, when we're looking at the property descriptor of our say hi function, you can see that the value is actually a function, which makes sense. That's what we just assigned. But there were 2 properties I just showed you, but there were actually 4 on the descriptor. So what about those other 2 things? Well, they're enumerable and configurable, and it's time for us to talk about them. We're going to talk about them multiple times in this talk. They're very interesting. So they're actually pretty special keys. They have nothing to do with data properties, data descriptors specifically. They're going to exist on every property descriptor ever, which is why they're so interesting. So what is enumerable? Enumerable tells us whether a property descriptor is going to allow the property to be visible when we enumerate over it. So basically, if a property descriptor's value for enumerable is true, it basically means, hey, this property is going to show up if you enumerate over it. What does it mean to enumerate? Well, it could be a for in loop, and if you're using a for in loop over the object, then if the property's value for enumerable is true, it's going to show up. Also, if you call object.keys on the object, in order for it to show up in that situation, the enumerable property has to be true. You might be wondering, don't you always want everything to show up when you enumerate? Hold that thought. We'll come back to it. Maybe not. Okay, so we talked about enumerable. What about configurable? Configurable tells us whether the property that we're looking at, the descriptor for the property that we're looking at, can be modified or deleted. So if a property has a value for configurable set to false, it means, hey, you can't configure it, don't touch this. It basically means you can't delete it, you can't modify it, but so far everything we've looked at, all the property descriptors have had configurable true. You might be wondering, is that going to change? Yeah, we'll come back to that. But first, I want to tell you about another type of property that we can assign on objects if you're using ES5. If you're not using ES5, if it predates ES5, you can just cover your ears. Or maybe you should leave them uncovered, and then you'll be like, oh, I should use ES5, or actually ES6, which is more modern. But I'm talking, of course, about getters and setters. Getters and setters kind of look just like other properties that you might interact with, but they're actually functions that write and retrieve a value. So they're pretty useful when you want to access a property that might be dynamic or dynamically return a value. So in this situation, we have a getter where you can see it's pulling another property off the object, doing something to it, and then there's just like some random math in there because it's dynamic, and I couldn't come up with a better example. But the point being is that this getter is going to return a dynamic value whenever you call it. But the way that you call it is similar to how you would call another property on an object. So when we look at the property descriptor for this getter, and we can call, again, getOwnPropertyDescriptor and call loudSound, which is the name of our getter function. If we look at what that actually returns, we'll see that it gives us a property descriptor, and it has configurable and enumerable, except writable and value are nowhere to be found. Instead, we have these other things. We have get and set is actually undefined. There's a reason for that. It's because we didn't write a setter. But get and set are actually indicators of the type of property that we're looking at. Remember that the property descriptor is kind of like this hidden peek into what that property actually is. So by just looking at that property descriptor, you can understand what type of property is on the object. And that's the same situation here. So we're not dealing with the same properties that we saw when we were looking at data properties. There's no writable, there's no value. Instead, there's get and set, which tells us this is an accessor property, not a data property. Different. Accessor properties come with a pair of getter-setter functions, and they aren't going to have the same keys that we saw before. Instead, they have a set function, and they have a get function. But if you think about it, they kind of are mirror images of the data property, because the set property, or the set key, is basically the equivalent of the writable key in the data property, and the get key is basically the same as the value property. And so if you start to think about it, of course it would be weird to have both value and get, because how would you know which one is the right one? Is the getter going to return the correct value for the property, or is value going to return it? So we have getters and setters, but because they can retrieve dynamic values, this means that a getter could compute a different value every time. So that's important to remember. They're not quite the same as data properties. The gotcha with getters is that you can invoke them the same as data properties, but even though you're using the dot syntax, you shouldn't be fooled into thinking that you'll get the same value, because they are dynamic. So now we have two types of properties, two different types of descriptors. What next? Well, you can modify and manipulate properties, and it makes you feel very powerful. And then you end up in situations where you did a thing that you didn't mean to do, which may or may not have happened to me. So, by default, all JavaScript objects are extensible. And what that means is that new properties can be added to them, which makes sense. That's kind of how we've been operating this whole time. We created a cat, and we added some stuff to it, and nobody said, hey, you can't do that, because the object was extensible. But you can change the extensibility of an object on a property basis, or even on an object basis, too. So let's return back to configurable and enumerable. They've returned for their encore. And here they are. They're going to make our lives a little tricky, or fun. depends on your perspective. We can modify these two, which exist on data properties and accessor properties, in order to limit the interface of an object. So for example, we might say, oh, I don't want anyone to add properties to this object or remove them, but they can keep writing to things that are writable. That's fine. In this situation, we could actually seal the object. It was in this moment when I really wish there was a seal emoji, but there's not. That would have been great. For example, let's say we have this cat and we're like, okay, you can write to it, you can write to the properties that are already writable, but no more adding properties, no more removing properties, not allowed. So we can seal our cat object, in which case we'll see that the property descriptor for sound looks different than it looked like before. Before we sealed it, configurable was set to true. However, now configurable is false, which means you can't, if you go and try to add another property to this, in strict mode, it'll actually give you a type error. And now you basically have to work within the confines of whatever cat is, its properties, and whatever it's going to return to you, and that's it. But you can still write to it. Maybe we don't want to write to it. Maybe we want to complicate things even further, and maybe we want no new properties, no removing of properties. And you know what? You can't even write to properties. We basically want to make this object immutable. Well, we can do that. We can freeze the object, and it's going to do something to your property descriptors. So for example, say we have this cat, and we're like, bad cat, put you outside. I don't condone this. Don't actually do this. This is terrible. But say we just object.freeze this cat. We froze our cat object, and it's okay. We'll bring it inside to the fire later, next to the fire. It's all. It's fine. This cat is ephemeral. Don't get too emotionally attached to it. Say we froze our cat object, and suddenly our property descriptors are going to look different. All of our writable values, all of our writable properties are now no longer true. They're false. You can't change the value of them. And they're not configurable, which means this object is not extensible. You can't do anything to it. Frozen in time. But there are some things to be careful when it comes to freezing objects, cats or otherwise. First, if you freeze an object and your object has getters, remember that getters are dynamic. So if we froze that cat and it had that loud sound function, the getter function, that's still going to do math.random. You're not guaranteeing that that getter is going to always return a single number. So remember, getter is dynamic. If you're going to freeze something, you need to be aware of what you're doing, because it might behave differently. The other thing is, I said earlier that you can assign an object as the value of a property on an object. If you do this, well, you better have a friend nearby to remind you that the object that is the value is not necessarily going to freeze when you freeze the main object. So something else to think about. Finally, let's talk about enumerable. Most of the objects that we deal with in JavaScript are going to inherit from a prototype of some sort, which we can think of as the parent constructor object that every object will inherit from in some way. That might be different for different types of objects, but it will exist. When it comes to objects, however, enumerable properties are only going to really show up for us when we're looking at the object's own properties. So what that means is the parents or the prototype object, those properties are not going to be enumerable. This might seem a little convoluted, but there's a reason for this. Let's take a look at an array, which is actually just an object. And let's just say we'll look at the property descriptor for an array. Well, it turns out apparently arrays have a property called length, and its value is 0, which is probably what you expect. You can write to it, which makes sense because somebody somewhere is probably going to update the value of that when you add something to the array. You can not enumerate and not configure this property, which is probably good because I don't want someone changing what array does or array.length does, because I depend on that a lot, as I'm sure a lot of people do. But why is enumerable false? Well, if enumerable was true, then anytime you iterated over that array, length would show up, and you probably only care about the contents of the array, the properties within the array, not the length method. And actually, the same goes for the prototype. We haven't really talked about this proto thing, but if you call object.getOwnProperty descriptors on any JavaScript object, you will see this prototype. And that basically is the parent object for whatever it is that you're looking at. But for example, in array, some of the things inside of proto are like entries and map and all these functions that I'm glad they exist, but I don't want them in my loops. And that would be very miserable. That there's a reason that it doesn't show up in JavaScript, and it's because those properties are enumerable false by default, so that when you look at the properties of an object, you're not pulling everything else that it inherited from all of its ancestors as well. So it's actually kind of cool. So, remember the curly braces? Turns out they're not as simple and basic as maybe we thought. Objects are a little bit complex. But they're also super cool. It's really interesting to start digging into how these things work, because you start to understand why API authors and library authors have to consider things like enumerability, or why they need to consider legacy code using for-in loops. Because if you don't think about the enumerability of something within a constructor that someone else might be relying on, you might break old apps or people trying to use your own open source code. So they're complex, they're cool, but really the most important thing is that they are actually accessible to us. You can just open up your JavaScript console, play with this stuff, and then start Googling, find the MDN docs, and you'll probably find some version of one of these methods within any framework that you work with, which is pretty awesome. So if you take anything away from this talk, aside from don't freeze your cat, don't be afraid to peek under the hood to understand how things work. It might seem scary and daunting at first, and maybe it is a little tricky, but you'll find out that you're actually probably more equipped than you realize to understand how these things work, and then maybe you'll feel a little bit better about JavaScript by the end of the day. Thank you so very much. Just a quick shout out. I know it was mentioned before, but if you like understanding how things work, like computer science or distributed systems, you can go to basecs.org or basecs.org and learn about either of those things in hopefully a fun, friendly, approachable, non-judgmental way.
Cool. Thank you so much, Mighty. All right, couple of last words. Thank you to the folks at Notion. They gave us organizers a free team account, which helps us to organize this event really well. It's a pretty cool tool. So it is the all-in-one workspace for your notes, tasks, wikis, and databases. You can learn more about that at notion.so. So thank you, Notion. We'd also like to thank Okta for recording and producing our talk videos. Okta provides authentication, authorization, and user management to your web or mobile app. You can learn more about that at developer.okta.com or on Twitter at OktaDev. Ampersat. It's a thing. So, with that, just one final round of applause for our speakers, organizers, Alchemy Code Lab for hosting us, Mirror by Night for our captions, our sponsors, and all of you lovely people for being here and supporting us. We are looking for speakers, so if this looked like fun, hit us up, find someone with a yellow lanyard, or donut.js.club/speak. If you don't know what you want to talk about, we can help you with that. We're also looking for sponsors. So if you have a company that likes to do that, let us know. There are lots of options available for that. You can go to donut.js.club/sponsor, or again, find a yellow lanyard. Feel free to hang out. If there's donuts left, eat them, please. or take them with you. That's fine. Leave a note in our feedback box if you want that. Otherwise, we'll see you again next month. Good night, and please get home safe.